Death is the only certainty we share, and yet we're rarely taught how to face it. Welcome to the podcast of The Living and Dying, a podcast where I sit with incredible humans from ancient lineages and modern frontiers, shamans, indigenous elders, artists, physicists, and death workers, to dismantle our fear of death so that we can radically reframe what it means to be alive. These are slow-burning, soul-level conversations about how to make death the most conscious experience of our lives, because when you make peace with death, you can finally live life fully. Thank you very much for being here. This is the Academy of Living and Dying, the podcast that was created for the Academy, and it is a space devoted to dissolving the silence around death so life can be lived more fully and consciously. It challenges the separation between living and dying, suggesting that they are not opposites, but are mirrors informing one another. And we are seeking to reduce the fear of death and the stigma that comes along with it so we can deepen our awareness of how respecting death can transform how we live. And today I'm introducing Charles Eisenstein. And he's an American writer, a speaker, public thinker. He's also a father, and he's known for exploring themes like culture, consciousness, money, ecology, and what he calls the story of separation in modern society. The reason I specifically wanted him on this podcast is because we could see him as a counterculturalist. His work sits outside dominant cultural narratives, and he does question core Western assumptions such as endless economic growth as progress and separation from nature as normal. But he's different from traditional counterculturalists as he doesn't frame things as us versus them or push for revolution. He tends to emphasize integration, healing, and coherence rather than rebellion. So I've coined him a meta-culturalist, someone who steps outside dominant narratives but doesn't fight them so much as to question the deeper story underneath them. The books that shaped his voice are The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, Sacred Economics, and The Ascent of Humanity. More importantly, he's known for telling a new story of the world, and that's what I'm really interested to dive in, is that he believes that humanity is moving out of a mindset of separation into one of interbeing, that everything is connected. And he suggests that much of modern society is organized around the avoidance of death, sometimes at the cost of truly living, and that our fear of death shapes how our society is built. And we'll dive into that as well. So having him on the podcast is a real honor, as he allows us to create a true connection between meaning makers like Charles and those who accompany people through death firsthand. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Gabby. Wow, what an introduction. I'll do my best to live up to that.
Yeah. We'll take it easy. Let's start with just a few personal questions on when was your first encounter with death or with the idea of impermanence?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'd say it was probably when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. I remember lying in bed and it just dawning on me what death, as it was in my culture, actually meant. The total annihilation of consciousness, the end of everything. And I was visited by this dread, this horror that was inescapable and undeniable, yet could not be faced. It was too horrible. So like I had to escape it and deny it, but I couldn't escape it and deny it. And that kind of like lived with me like a parasitic worm burrowing at my brain for a long time, until like it made everything not quite okay ever, and drove me eventually to find ways to come to terms with it.
What age was that at?
Like 6 or 7. I was a little kid. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when was the first time that have you ever encountered losing someone in your life firsthand?
Well, I was very close to my mother, and she, I mean, of course, grandparents, et cetera, but the first one that was like I would say a profound loss was my mother. She passed away 6 years ago.
how did that shape your narrative or your understanding of death before losing someone that was close to you and after losing somebody that was close to you?
It actually didn't change it that much because on some level, I understood that the woman who passed away was not the young mother that I knew when I was a kid, was not the vibrant grandmother I knew when I started having kids. You know, she was a very frail and uncomfortable old woman. That's who died. So I didn't feel like there was actually any more cause for grief after she died than there was before she died, because all that she had been had died also. But there were things that um, did land grief on me, you know, like the way that she said my name, for example. No one else said my name that way. The way that she like responded when I would visit her or call her. Um, that is something. But on the other hand, like some of those things have like this eternal feel, that they're of her essence, that uh, just changes form but doesn't actually die.
Mm. What That was one of the questions that I had for you is that we'll get more into the depth and then I wanted to go into the society, more the structural, institutional, but I think let's start with the heart as well. And thank you for your vulnerability to speak of your mother and of things that are more sensitive to the heart. Um, but what dies really? Is death an ending or a change of relationship? When we say dying, what dies really?
First, I want to say that it's necessarily a certain amount of mystery and unknowing about what happens after you die. The if we truly understood that death is an illusion, then we wouldn't have the kind of experience that we need to have here. We've actually constructed, on some soul level, constructed a forgetting uh, as we enter into this world. That forgetting allows us to play out the dramas that are available from a place of separation. And these are beautiful dramas. And we wouldn't, if we were in the constant consciousness of our eternal nature, then all these dramas wouldn't seem like such a big deal. You know, all the dramas that are only important if you think you're not going to die on some level, if you think that you can hold on to all of this, if you think that your identity is permanent, then if you think that, then you're going to care a lot about your money, your reputation, being right, having power. But the more that you realize that that you're going to die, that everything that is attached to those possessions will die. Whatever survives death isn't that. It's not your name, it's not your reputation, it's not your money, it's not your possessions, it's not your image in the eyes of others. None of that. The more that you realize that, the less interested you become in the dramas that are around those things. And that's a natural process, as you witness, at least for me, as I grow older, as it becomes more and more blatantly obvious that I'm not going to survive this, as I see contemporaries, first my parents' generation, now some people in my own generation passing away, it starts to get undeniable that all of these things are impermanent. And so it's a natural process. I don't even think it's wrong for young people to be in this delusion that they're going to live forever. Because it's kind of part of being young, this feeling of immortality and invulnerability. But everybody eventually goes through some kind of initiation that demonstrates otherwise.
Do you believe that it is possible to transcend this illusion while we're alive?
Well, certainly people, yeah, I mean, people have near-death experiences, and they lose their fear of death. People have deep spiritual experiences, psychedelic experiences, but even that, those lend a certain um, luminosity to the life that proceeds thereafter, and but you still, get back into the dramas. But it does help, I think, sometimes to step outside all of those into um, a more enduring truth.
I've done quite a number of vipassanas. I'm wondering if you have also done more extended sprouts of isolation where we can sit in that truth a little bit longer. And I hear you when we come back to society and the dramas and the environment in which we're in, that we're so habituated to reacting to. Do you believe that it is possible to transcend the illusion in a way that it isn't in an isolated environment?
Well, why do you want to transcend the illusion? We're here to be part of the play. I wouldn't call it so much an illusion as a play, like a theater production. Like you're in the circus arts, and so you go into the circus and you put on, sometimes you'll put on some kind of dramatic performance. There might be clowns, there might be a storyline, and you go into that. On some level, that it's just a play. You're putting on a show, but you also take it very seriously. And if one of the performers is like, hey, Gabby, why are you taking it so seriously? This is just a show, like they're going to ruin it. So, yeah, I'm not so interested in stepping out of the play that I have. I mean, who knows, like what the casting call was like, and how much we had to audition to even be here. So, there's plenty of time to transcend it after I'm dead.
And I agree with you. And also, there is a trajectory of waking up in this life. It feels like as we mature, as we go through the play, we start sniffing that something might be off, or that we are playing a little bit of a play. And that waking up for me means transcending the illusion. It is to wake up and realize we're in a play, and this identity can also shift, and our beliefs
Yeah.
and our narratives, they create our realities and our ego structures. So I think that it's part of the DNA of the incarnation
Well,
programming.
yeah. So those moments of awakening to the illusion of it all, those are really important because they allow you to shift into the next drama, into the next play. They allow you to evaluate the role that you've been playing. And you might say, actually, I'm done with that role. And I'm done with this whole game. I'm ready for another one. And, given the state of the world right now and the narratives and the dramas that have enrolled everybody in a war of each against all, and the war of us against them. I mean, that's one of the plays, us versus them. I think we really do need to take a step back and evaluate whether we want to continue that particular play, or maybe it's time for another one. Maybe it's time to transition into another act, another movement of the symphony. I sure think it is. So in those, this happens repeatedly to many of us throughout life. We have a moment of awakening, but you don't stay there. It's like it's a resting place, a vantage point where you can see it from the outside, and then enter back in with some intention about, okay, who do I want to be now? Because usually we're kind of on autopilot. We've set things up, we've cast ourselves into a role, and then we kind of just immerse in that until it plays itself out, until you've done all that you can in that role, until that particular chapter is over. And then it starts to feel fake. It starts to feel like you're just going through the motions, It starts to feel like, what am I doing here? This is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife, You start to, that's a Talking Heads reference in case I'm dating myself here, but you start to feel like I'm not in the right story now. Yeah, that's when the transcendence is really useful.
And if you've ever been in a theater play and you have a whole cast of characters with you, even if you step off the stage, the play still goes on. And you're still in the same room with under the same lighting and the same seating. The, they're impacting the rest of the room, even if now you realize that you've chosen to get off the stage. How can we awaken from this act or this yeah, this act, and then also create impact so that the theater show changes?
And this is what I call the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. In some way, maybe through words, but usually through your presence, your being, your actions, your choices, you invite people into a new story. You make an offering. So if it's the story of each versus all, if it's the story of everybody maximizing their rational self-interest in a competitive economy, and you practice generosity and you let go of control, you're making an offering. You're violating the terms of reality. And that is, if somebody else is immersed in the story of separation, the story of competition, the story of scarcity, and they witness that, it could awaken in them a knowledge that there is another story. Because they'll be like, what's this person doing? Like, it doesn't make sense. Why would they be like, generosity just doesn't make sense unless you can somehow calculate to get, I don't know, maybe people will admire me for being generous and I'll get some benefits that way, but that's not real generosity. Real generosity is a letting go. And that only makes sense if you're not just a separate self. If in some way you're not separate from me. And what I give, I also receive. And if that is a deeply felt and known truth, then you'll be generous. It'll make sense. And then you'll also be a walking invitation for others to join in that story. So that's kind of the way that we can offer a different screenplay.
It's embodying different actions like pattern interrupters.
Mm-hmm.
I have a vision of those people in New York City on busy streets where they just sit down and start meditating.
Yeah.
And at first people are they look awkwardly and they don't know what to do, and then but there is an impact. It does affect the field. It does bring in new questioning, and in some way, at least the questioning uh, and the pattern interruption is the seed to new actions because you've seen something different. I love that. Um, okay, I would like to dive a little bit more into the more institutional components. Is that okay? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so modern Western society mostly denies death, but yet it quietly shapes everything, our healthcare systems, all institutions. And
Mm-hmm.
if we zoom out, a lot of modern Western systems can be read as attempts to avoid, manage, delay, or psychologically distance ourselves from death rather than to integrate it as a normal part of life. We see this shaping the narrative and our institutions. So, how do you think this collective relationship to death has shaped our institutions?
Yeah. I mean, it shapes them on so many levels. One of those would be like the obsession with safety that has infiltrated more and more of modern life, where, if you, and this comes from the belief, again, that you're a separate self in a world of other that is annihilated upon death. That's the worst possible outcome. So you do everything you can to defy death. And because, see, okay, I'm not really answering your question here, but I'm just going to say it anyway. Basic mythology of science tells us that our genes essentially program us to maximize our reproductive self-interest, to survive and reproduce, and that any purpose to life beyond that is really just in our imaginations. So if you have no purpose to being alive, then you might as well just what is the purpose then? It's just to survive. It's just to be alive. And therefore, there is nothing more important than staying safe and staying alive. Whereas if you are devoted to a purpose, that may become more important than even staying alive. Anyone who has become a parent will understand this. There's something more important. Even people who work with children, I mean, once you recognize that no matter what happens, you're going to die anyway, then you want to be in service to the future that will outlast you. So, but the denial of death, the phobia of death, it colors everything in our society. The obsession with youth, for example, in cosmetics and fitness, and the longevity movement, the anti-aging technologies, the way that we sequester old people away and sick people away. You don't see, the fact that death happens in private all the time. And then all of the euphemisms around it to avoid even talking about it, as if we could banish it and make it disappear. The fact that it is a forbidden topic in many situations. And I understand why. Like that experience, what I had when I was, 5, 6, 7 years old, is like, it was so horrifying that I just wanted to do anything to not think about it. So there is possibly the root of many of our addictions, our distractions, our craving for entertainment, our craving to fill every empty moment, because in those empty moments you come back to the impermanence of yourself and the finality of death. And when it has been narrated to us as the total annihilation of consciousness, the snuffing out of a candle flame, that's terrifying. Most human beings who have ever lived on Earth do not believe that.
Mm.
But that's what I grew up believing.
But yet this is just a Western perspective, right? Because there are other cultures, modern or ancients, that have a different relationship with that.
Oh, yeah.
That is, what other cultures have inspired you to imagine a more beautiful death?
I spent 9 years of my life living in Taiwan and absorbed a lot of that culture's way of holding death. In that culture, many people are in constant communication with their ancestors in ways that are quite even like routine. They have these here. In fact, here I'll show you actually. Just a second. These can be used to consult the ancestors. See, they have a round end and a flat end, flat side and a round side, and so you toss those, and if they're both facing, how is it? Anyway, like depending on how they fall, it means a yes or a no or a cast it again. And people like use that all the time. They consult their ancestors on various life decisions. And many households will have a altar, that has maybe little photographs of their departed ancestors and incense, and there's just ways that you maintain good relations with them. And it's not for them, not some woo-woo thing, it's like traditional people there. It's as important as practicing personal hygiene. You got to do these things, it's part of reality as they know it. So that made quite an impression on me. And I've done a lot of reading and stuff, and I became very, I think even when I was a teenager or in college, I read Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, about near-death experiences. So it's been kind of in my field for a long time. So I'm familiar with various cultures' views on reincarnation and the afterlife.
Maybe going a little bit deeper then, what are some of the rituals that you hold to be able to keep death present in your life?
Well, sometimes I just contemplate. I kind of fast forward to my deathbed and try to incorporate that perspective into the choices that I face right now as an antidote to my lingering delusion of youth that I will live forever.
Interesting. So when you make key decisions, you fast forward to the moment that you will die to see if it is in alignment with the decision that you're making.
It's not that regular or consistent practice, but I do that sometimes.
Cool, though. It's very cool.
Yeah. It's not even it's not quite as conscious as you describe it. It's not like I go, okay, and now what am I going to do? Knowing it's just like I just know that if I occupy that place, at that perspective, it will in some way feed my choice.
Yeah,
I may not be able to reason it out. I might not be able to say, okay, I'm making this choice because when I'm on my deathbed, I don't want to regret not spending enough time with my kids. Like it's not that explicit. It's more of just like if I bring in that perspective, then I will choose in a wiser way.
Exactly. I think there's a balance between being in the great mystery of life unfolding and then also choosing consciously to act within your dharma that would be fulfilling your purpose and and the reason that you're here when you arrive to your deathbed. And actually it was a personal question that I really love to ask people is that what if anything are you still avoiding that death would force you to face?
I tend to kind of take for granted the small pleasures of life and my loved ones even. They become normal, they become routine. And when I tune into the inevitability of death, like my death or their death, they become so much more precious, you know. So I think I could say that I avoid the full experience of the preciousness of life, and that and the preciousness of each moment. All of life is such a gift and so fragile. It could end tomorrow. It could end in 5 minutes. This could be the last conversation I ever have with anybody. When I can touch that, life becomes more alive. It's a paradox in a way. The presence of death makes life more alive.
And if you were to die tomorrow, how would you like for your death to look like?
I really can't answer that. You know, I know that whatever process I will go through will be the one that my soul is designed for. The maximum development. I mean, I'd kind of like it to be quick and painless, but but maybe I need for it to last some time so I can complete some processes that have not been completed.
There's two questions that came up from that question. Actually, it's more, have you read the Tibetan Book of the Dead?
I haven't read it verbatim. I've read, treatments of it. But I haven't read the original. Maybe I have. I don't know. I don't remember.
There's these core premises in the Tibetan Book of the Dead that death obviously is not an end, but a transition, and that you go through these different bardos at the end of your life. And that consciousness continues after physical death. And so the awareness does not immediately cease when the body dies, but it moves through subtle stages. Do you believe that there is an awareness that transitions from this waking consciousness to beyond death in the subtler realms?
Yeah. At this point, like given the massive literature on near-death experiences and from hypnotic regressions and from reincarnation research and stuff, I think it would be irrational to believe otherwise. Depends on what you mean by believe. My considered opinion is that consciousness persists after death and that the soul is immortal. But I also have kind of ingrained beliefs from my upbringing that say, oh no, that's just a bunch of nonsense. Yeah, I'm not alone. My stated beliefs and my conscious beliefs being different from my actual beliefs.
The reason I bring it up as well is because in the Bardos, one of the main core and essential teachings of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is that preparation during life is essential. And in fact, that how we cultivate awareness, non-attachment, and familiarity with death directly influences how one experiences dying. I guess the question is twofold. One, I'd love to know more about you and how you prepare for death, but mostly on a civilization level, on a Western society level, the impact of not preparing for death, or is there a way that people do prepare for death that I'm unconscious of? But just speak to me a little bit about how we can best prepare for our own death when our institutions don't really cultivate for that.
I would just offer the first step, which is to accept that death is going to happen and to integrate that truth. That process of integrating it will generate ways of preparing for it. You can't prepare for something that you deny will even happen. So that's the first step, is just to accept it. And then, then ways of preparing, I think, will become, which might be unique to each person, their history, given their cultural surroundings. I could also say a good way to prepare for death is to deliver what is in you to the world so that it outlasts you. Then you will not be so attached anymore. If you have given away everything you can give away and there's nothing left, in a sense, you will be prepared for death, because all the things that you can't take with you, you'll be maybe on your deathbed, and you will look upon all that you have created, all that you have sown in the world, all the beauty that you have given the world, all the life that you have given the world, and you will feel happy about your existence. You can't take money or status or even what you've learned, knowledge, with you. Even in old age, you start to forget that stuff. But what you can and do take with you is everything that you've given away. So it's the rational mind has trouble understanding that. But maybe you can feel what I mean. What you take with you is everything that you have given.
It's amazingly said, actually. Just a few questions on grief, and then we'll call it for this first part of our podcast. You speak of grief as an intelligence, and you speak of grief as sacred. What do you think happens when we don't allow ourselves to fully feel grief?
Grief is how we integrate loss. If you avoid grief, then on some level, you're denying that you have lost something that you have lost, and you're not living in reality. You're operating in a pretense, and nothing good comes from that. That incompleteness will also prevent you from feeling joy. You'll live like in just a narrow bandwidth of feeling. You can only laugh as hard as you can cry. Is what happens when you encounter the reality of loss. Yeah.
It seems to be one of the most complex emotions. They say that it has more than 5 emotions, all integrated into oneself. And in my own personal experience, it just feels like an avalanche is hitting you from every direction. And with the loss of your mother, and also with your experience with people on their deathbed, what do you believe grief is in terms of emotion?
Well, I mean, there's the classic 5 stages of grief, right? Don't even need to go through those. There's 5 stages that all kind of mix in together. It's not always linear. Yeah, for me, it's sadness, and there's just no other way but to move through it. And if you don't move through it, then it's there waiting for you, and it's hard to move through it. Our society doesn't really give a lot of space for grief, because it has its own timetable. It may and its own waves. Last for days, it can last for weeks, months, years. Other cultures have much better ways of dealing with it. In Taiwan, at funerals, sometimes they have professional mourners who come. They're paid, and they're not just putting on a show. They like genuinely enter wailing, crying grief, and they kind of break the ice, maybe for others to do the same. I heard, but then I also read an anecdote from an indigenous culture where a woman's young child died. The next day, she was just up and about doing her work, and the anthropologist asked her, why aren't you in grief? And she said, our grief holiday is coming. She said, it's not now, but when it comes, I will then experience the grief. Grief has always been, in most cultures, public. It's not something you just do in private on your pillow.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, everything was more public. I guess if grief is the acknowledgement and integration of loss, then others who have suffered that loss join you in that acknowledgement and integration. It's like if you see something and no one else sees it, you wonder if you're crazy. If we're outside and I say, hey, look at that flying saucer over there, and you say, what? I don't see a flying saucer. Then I think I'm crazy. So when you lose somebody, it's hard to actually believe it. It's hard for me to believe that my mother is not here because she was such a fixture of reality. She had been there my entire life, Like, how could she not be there? It just doesn't make sense. When others affirm mother is not here anymore, it helps the integration. It helps to actually come to terms with the loss. Otherwise, you kind of go on living in some delusion that person's not dead.
Do you practice any arts in general? Painting, dancing, movement? My question is, do you believe that art and expression allows for the emotions of grief to move through you better?
Yeah, I think that's a good way. I'm not, I'm not an expert on that. You should talk to Francis Weller. Is he on your list? Beautiful soul, beautiful writer, and does a lot of work around grief.
Well, it's just when you were saying that grief isn't meant to be just you being on your pillow alone, that being connected to others who have also lived a similar experience. There's the same, I'm feeling is the same way as you are holding an emotion within you without expression. And it is quite limited to be speaking a language with words that are very fixed on meaning. Whereas with art is quite infinite, where how you can express the pain, how you can express the emotion. I see it almost like a shower of emotions moving through you in a non-linear way. I'm in my own pursuit of and curiosity of understanding grief. I wonder if art is one of the best therapies for it. Thank you so much for your time. One question I really want to put forward is, what would a beautiful death look like in a healed culture? And this will be my last question.
It's just so unique for each person. I guess it would be the culture would trust the process that person is going through, and it would prioritize allowing that process to happen. There's intelligence of the soul that knows how to die.
It's really well said. And I think there's snippets from this podcast and interview that can answer that question also, to be witnessed in our process, to actively come to terms with the impermanence of life, to imagine the moment that we will reach our death in some of the decisions that we make in our life today. I think for me, it is quite clear that it is a personal experience to go through death and grief, but it's always an opportunity to get real, that we are able to prepare for death in any moment and to also prepare for grief for the only truth that we know in this life, which is that we're going to die and our loved ones are going to die, because the fabric of this reality is impermanent. And the more we take advantage of our living consciousness to prepare for this, will allow us to reach the levels of familiarity and peace that comes with death in that we see in other cultures. And that this is an opportunity for us in the Western world to be able to also be guided in that example. So on that note, thank you. Yeah. And on that note, this is Charles Eisenstein. And where can people find your work, and where can people find where you're going to be speaking next?
Well, they can find it on the internet.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I could probably do better in that. I'm not doing as much public speaking as I used to.
You will stay tuned in with the internet.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Charles.
Thank you, Gabby. It's a pleasure.